Awesome. Well, welcome to our meetup today. We're doing our Ask Me Anything for this quarter. So we're going to go over really quick why we're here, the code of conduct. We're going to have some introductions. And then Kevin will be leading us through our Q&A. And we'll talk about what the updates that have happened in the last month and go over some community achievements that folks have made. So we're here to meet each other, to learn about Liquibase, and to share questions and problems that we might be having, and especially in this one. That's the whole purpose of the Ask Me Anything meetup. We got quite a few questions from people before the meeting this time, so that's exciting. I think everybody knows that we all have to treat each other with respect. So I'm not going to go over this, but just remember. And if you want to take a second to set your name in Zoom so that it is kind of like a virtual introduction, this gives you the instructions for how you can do that really quick and easy, just so we can kind of get some idea of who you are and why you're here. So I'm going to rename myself and put my title in here. Right. And so, whoops, I gotta click in the window. There we go. Did I go too far? Nope, that's it. Okay, Kevin, take it away.
All right. Well, we did, like Tabby said, we did get a lot of questions from the survey that we sent out. And so we'll certainly go through those in a second. But what I wanted to do first is, since Ian and Jimmy, since y'all are here, if you had questions that you wanted to, things you want to talk about, questions you wanted answered, things you want to discuss, whatever, we should start with you.
No, this is Ian. I didn't arrive with any questions. Thank you. Thanks for the offer.
Jimmy. All right. Well, if you think of a question, Jimmy, feel free to jump in. So let's go to our first question. So a community member asked, I'm new to Liquibase, and I need guidance around structuring the project to start on the right foot, such as number of changelog files, rollbacks, etc. This is a general question of what are best practices of getting started with Liquibase. Who would like to field this question?
I can start it anyway. Part of the problem is, I've done enough consulting help over the years that the answer is always it depends. And part of it is that Liquibase is trying to it is kind of trying to be able to work with your systems and your way of working. And so to a large extent, the best starting out is something that's going to be easy and work with what you currently have versus trying to add Liquibase plus do a whole bunch of other things as well too. Yeah, there's good docs there in the link there. So we have that. Overall, my first thought, or my first push would be to just kind of try to keep it simple. You don't need a whole bunch of changelog files. You can just kind of get by with one. I tend to be more on the side of I like less files versus like a separate file per SQL change that you want to make just gets to be, for me, harder to manage. And so even just starting off with a single changelog file, look at the different formats we have: formatted SQL, XML, YAML, JSON, and find the one that works sort of best and right for you, depending on how much you like SQL or how much you like cross database, whatever. Find the one that works. Maybe even just have one file. Just start putting your change sets in there, and as you start to get more experience with Liquibase and your file gets larger, you can start thinking about how you might want to not break it up, because it's already a file, and breaking it up is hard, but you can just kind of leave that, sort of freeze that file as it is and move on to a next file and a next file, and kind of see where you end up, versus kind of needing to think about all that up front when you don't really know as much. Rollbacks, are always good to put in there. Because it lets you be able to do things like rollbacks when you want to do them. If you're really just kind of purely doing roll forwards, you maybe don't even need to bother with the rollback stuff, but it is probably kind of a good practice to start putting in there, because you're not going to know you need them until you really, really need them. And that's not the time to, have to start thinking about them. So more you maybe start using that, and, doing at least kind of in some of your pipeline, doing a update testing rollback sort of a command once or twice in there, just to make sure they're in there and are working correctly, probably the better.
Great, Nathan. Just to summarize what I heard Nathan say, just to put some bullets on it. You have a couple of key decisions to make when you start, and I do agree, keep it simple. One changelog, great way to start. You do need to decide if you're going to stay focused on SQL and use the formatted SQL changelog format, or and that's great for teams that are used to SQL and you don't have the need to deploy to multiple different types of databases. If you do want to deploy to multiple different types of databases, or take advantages of advanced functionality in Liquibase, then using the XML, the model-based version, which is XML, JSON, and YAML, is a good choice there. So that's kind of the first big choice you make. Then the second choice, I like the discussion around rollbacks. You have to decide, do you want to be a roll forward shop, or do you want to be a rollback shop? You don't really have to pick one or the other, but it kind of puts you on a path. DevOps tends to be good DevOps best practice tends to be roll forward. So make small changes and just continually move to the next step. So if you need to make changes to your database, just alter your database and make those changes as you do your incremental development. But there are definitely plenty of situations where rollbacks are still valuable and still useful. And if your organization uses rollbacks, and that's important to you, then making sure you bring rollbacks into your changelog when you create your changes, so that they're, like Nathan said, they're there when you need them.
And I just wanted to note really quick that the link that was shared in chat will be put in the description of the video when I upload it to YouTube, so you can follow it there.
Near my keyboard. Can you add a link either here or there later, the one to the design patterns, Liquibase University? Because that's a great free resource that can go into some of these. And I'll say, as a very, very newbie, one of the first things I did, which I thought was, it wasn't so much in setting up a pipeline or anything like that. It was more generate changelog on an existing database, because I could do that and kind of see backwards, like what Liquibase would have kind of done in order to create that database. And it helped me sort of see what it was doing. Sometimes it's just fun to start with generating a changelog on an existing database.
That's a really good point, Karen. So that's the other decision you need to make. Do you want to pull the information from the current database and go from there so you can recreate your current database using Liquibase, or do you want to just pick up where the database is and move forward? So all good points. All right, let's move to the next question. When performing, I'm sorry.
Oh, I was just gonna say, all right, it's here.
Oh, perfect. When performing a migration from 3.8 to the latest version, is it better to do it in steps? Go from 3.8 to 3.9 to 3.10, or is it better to jump directly to the latest version?
Do you have an answer on that one, Mike? I took the last one.
Yeah, that's
you upgrade people more.
Yes, I do. So my suggestion would be go to the latest version, and that's going to have all your security fixes, and you're going to be up to date on the latest. The key thing there is you test it before you actually go forward. So making sure that you validate everything that you had before still works, and all the new features are in place that you're moving forward for. So that would be my suggestion. If you go the incremental, it's going to take much longer, and you're going to go until you find something that doesn't work, so to speak, and that's going to take much longer, and you're going to typically fall behind in terms of security issues and updates. So my suggestion, go to the latest. We even have some folks that have been running year-old long, versions. So there is that rip the Band-Aid off kind of thing that you're going to have to do, and there will probably be some work. I mean, how many pieces of software do you have that are multiple years old that you're still running, and it's running your production level kind of changes? There's going to be some changes in between the old version and the new version.
Yeah, go ahead, Karen.
Yeah, and I definitely agree with that.
Yeah, we can't hear you, Karen. Your audio. We can't hear you, Karen. Sorry. I was just going to add on to Mike's statement. We do pay a lot of attention to backward compatibility. So moving up within a major version, so staying in the 3.x line should be a no-brainer to upgrade. It's our intent to never have breaking issues there, or very, very minor things at all. When we go from a 3 to a 4, it's possible we'll have some breaking issues. Again, when we did 3 to 4, there really wasn't much, but possible. So feel very confident when you're staying within a version number, and when you're jumping version numbers, take a little bit extra time to do a little bit more testing. But our goal is always backward compatibility, so you shouldn't feel too worried about upgrading.
All right, let's move on to the next one.
All right, I don't want to share databases between application and Liquibase Changelog. It seems that these things should be separated. Is it possible to do this today? Schema is not an option, and do you have plans to implement this? Specify separate DB for Liquibase. I'm not sure. I'm not sure I understand this question.
I wonder if the question is, we have our kind of tracking tables that we store, the database changelog table and the database changelog lock tables, which we put into the database in order to let the database know what has been run and not ran. Mm-hmm. And they're maybe looking to have it be separated between not just a separate schema, but a separate database completely. Because so, and perhaps the schema is not an option. They're perhaps talking about, we do have a Liquibase schema name configuration value that you can pass along, which is, the schema that Liquibase stores those things in. And so we do have that ability to store those tables somewhere else. We also have a Liquibase catalog name argument as well too, or setting, which lets you possibly put it in a different, sort of database. That catalog term ends up meaning different things on different databases. Catalog kind of is the standard way, even though, different databases use it. So like if you're on SQL Server or something like that, that catalog is your database, or Postgres, catalog is your separate database, separate from your schema. Some of the issue though is that we do just kind of have a single connection that we use to apply the changes to the database, as we are using to, like insert or update into that database changelog table. And and some databases don't let you insert and update kind of cross database like that, even within a single connection. So there may be some database limitations that keep you from doing that, but we try our hardest to be able to do that. If you're looking for a completely separate database, like a separate instance or something like that, or just kind of, a completely different way of doing it, we do have an extension that allows you to use, we have an extension that allows you just to use like a CSV file that you have on your file system for doing your changelog tracking. So then you're not even putting anything in the database. It's up to you then to figure out, how you're going to be managing and centralizing that CSV file. That's one option there. That tracking system is also extensible. And so if you have, odd and different requirements around that, and a little bit of Java development, you can certainly make whatever you want to do. Like we replaced it, in the extension with a CSV file. You could certainly make a connection off to some separate database and track stuff in there however you want. And if you think that it's something generally applicable to other people, feel free to you know, show us, talk to us, and we can kind of help, you know, kind of popularize it or kind of list it in there for other people to take advantage of as well too.
The other thing to consider when you're doing that is replacing the lower environments with the production version. So because you are now tracking it in an external system, when you do your replacements to get your dev system back to whatever was recently deployed and you replace that, sometimes you forget to replace the tracking table. And so things get out of sync there. And so it's just a consideration to note, if you do push things outside of where you're actually deploying, there's some additional considerations you need to make as part of your pipelines and making sure that everything's in sync on what's been applied and what has not been applied. So just some additional caveats when you go down this route.
Yep. Good, very, very good point. You know, and from the question here, they put, it seems these things should be separated. And so the question is, yeah, is that seems correct? Is it that, you know, they were not, you know, they're not necessarily seeing, you know, that, yeah, the having them together, just, yeah, make sure that everything's always in sync, and it makes it simpler and easier. And that's why we do that. Normally, you know, I can imagine times where they, you know, based on their setup, it does seem for them that they should be separated, but that is probably a edge case that you're going to want them to be separated would be my suggestion.
Just to recap the question, to make sure everybody heard it. The question is, there are two Liquibase tables that get put into your schema, to their tracking tables, database changelog and database changelog lock. And the question is, can we separate that and put the Liquibase tables someplace different than where our application tables are? And the answer is you can, but best practice is to leave them together if at all possible. Mike makes the point that when you're moving your database, or when you're destroying it and starting over, when you're doing anything with it, if your tracking tables are alongside your schema, it makes it really easy for everything to work. But if you separate them, you have to remember that they're in separate places, and you have to keep them in sync. So if you make changes here, you have to make changes there. So one answer is it's probably good to keep them together, but if you really want to keep them separate, make sure that you pay attention to the fact that you have to keep them both in sync, and you have to manage both of them separately. They're not managed together, and that is also possible too. Is that a fair recap, Nathan?
Yep.
Right.
All right,
Fantastic.
next.
I was going to check, since we have Muni and Artur that joined us, wanted to see if you had any questions you'd like to get answered before we jump into some of the other questions that got asked on the forum. All right, well, if you have questions, feel free to put them in the chat and we'll get to them as soon as we see them up there. So this question is from Alex463001 on Discord. He says, I want to split Liquibase data and application data into separate databases. Hey, this sounds familiar. Is it possible to do this? I'm using SQL script and Postgres. So I guess this is exactly the same thing we just answered. So please see 5 minutes ago, and you have your answer. Is there a way to generate the change logs with the rollback? So when you're generating a change log, Nathan, can you automatically generate the rollbacks?
Yeah, it is not going to try to put those in, but you sort of have the caveat that if you're using just like if you're using XML or YAML or JSON, you know, when we're generating a change log, what we're doing is we're just kind of looking at, you know, sort of old state, new state, you know, what are the changes to get from one to the other, and we're not going to put in an explicit rollback block to be able to kind of get back to the old setup. Instead, what we will do is, but at the same time, a lot of our changes that get generated, you know, like create table, for example, it's able to, you know, we're able to sort of figure out the rollback just based on that information that's in there. So if it has a create table, we know that, okay, do a rollback, and, you know, to do a rollback, it'll just drop the table, or a rename table, something like that. We don't even need a rollback block. If you are generating it to a formatted SQL format, because we convert that into SQL, we sort of lose that context of, this was originally a create table, and so we can drop it this way. So it's not going to get included in that formatted SQL there. Excuse me. It's a good question to ask as far as a feature enhancement, whether we'd be able to do it or not. Part of the problem with rollback is that, as you get beyond the ones that we're able to just sort of generate from just kind of looking at the change that got there, is that it's usually sort of based on your context as to what makes sense to, what actually makes sense for the rollback. And it can be oftentimes sort of different depending on why you're making that particular change. But because, like the any generated change log, you want to think of that as a sort of first pass of, like us guessing at what it probably is and being right, 90% of the time, but there's still times that it's not, it's not completely right, or it's not containing all of the things. So you do always want to go back and look at your generated change sets. And if we were to try to pick out some of those rollbacks anyway that we can figure out, like when we see that we have to drop a table, we can generate a rollback that creates the table just as it was. And maybe, if you don't want to do that, then you just remove that from the generated change set before you actually start using it. So it'd be an interesting feature, something that we maybe should add into the issue tracking, but I don't think you can right now.
So the short answer to the question is, Liquibase does drop things. If you create things, it automatically knows to drop them. If you do an alter or you do a drop, it doesn't know how to unalter or undrop, aka do a create as a reverse.
Yeah.
But we don't. But to your point, might be an interesting feature, but we don't currently put that rollback that's implicit. We're not putting that directly in the changelog today, but possibly could. So it's an interesting idea.
Can you all hear me now?
Yes, we can.
Yay! I would just want to know. I mean, if I don't think this person's on the call, I wish they were. Me, I'm a product owner. I'm going to ask why. Just because generate changelog tends to be like what Nathan said, it's a state based on the snapshot, and if we're looking to roll back off that state based on that state, it just seems scary to me. So I really want to understand what was the use case that was driving them to that, to see if there might actually be a different way to do what they need to do.
I don't think that they gave any extra context, unfortunately. And because Discord doesn't happen real time, they asked this question in the middle of the night here, so I didn't get the chance to talk to them while they were on.
But the good news is, Karen, you can ask them because they are on Discord.
Yep.
All right, let's jump to the next question. How do I use preconditions to skip a change set and mark it as ran if the table does not exist? And maybe the meta question is, I want to skip a change set and mark it as ran if the table does not exist. How do I do that? Is preconditions the best way?
Yes. I guess if anybody else wanted to answer before I just dove in, sorry about that. I just get used to answering the questions, and so just go. And this one should be an easy one here too. First I would say that, if you are feeling like you are needing to use preconditions, it's a bit of a sort of bad database management smell, sort of like a bad code smell, where it's possibly pointing to something else that's a little bit off. Not that it's necessarily a problem, but in theory, Liquibase is tracking all of your change sets or all the changes that you're doing in there, and Liquibase is automatically always making sure things are ran once and only once. And so, if you are wondering if a table exists or not, it's pointing to the fact that things are going on outside of Liquibase, and those then by definition are sort of outside of kind of what what the sort of control and management you're looking to try to introduce with Liquibase. And so maybe, the answer is not use preconditions, but try to figure out, how to bring all of that stuff into Liquibase so it's managed in a single place. There's certainly times that that it happens, maybe you're introducing Liquibase, especially you hit this a lot as you're going from not managed to, centrally managed. That's a very common place where you need to do this. So it's there's certainly good valid times, but always ask, anytime you have a conditional thing in a change set, is this really a condition that we want? So within preconditions, you can do checks. We have a table exists checks, for example, so you can just say, if this table exists or not, you can put a not around there to be able to say if this table doesn't exist, then the precondition can end up failing. And then what you can do on your preconditions section, there's a on fail tag to say, what to do when the precondition fails. The default is to just stop the update and say, this precondition failed. The alternative, but alternative options, one could just be a warn and continue on. But the one that they're looking for here is mark ran. So you can just say, if this precondition fails, then mark this change set as ran and continue on. So that's what they would be looking for here is on fail equals mark ran on your precondition. And then you can just use that table exists precondition inside there.
Excellent. Great answer, Nathan. All right, from Gaspar on Discord. Is there a way to ensure the files are processed in a particular sort order? In our case, we have this, include all, path to package bodies, relative to changelog file is true. I want to ensure certain files are processed in a particular order. So I guess the question is, what is the sort order that include all uses when it picks up files from a directory?
I can let somebody else answer that for a change.
So it uses ASCII sort order. So if you do a directory listing, you can see if you go to your command line and do a directory listing, that is the order that it will package those. The shorter answer is don't use include all, and actually in your changelog, actually specify, I want this to execute in file 1, file 2, file 3. So that's how the short answer is. If you want it guaranteed to execute in the order, no matter what operating system, no matter what system it is running on, you specify that in include file, include file, include file. That guarantees that's the order it's going to. If it's include all, then basically you're up to the operating system listing of what that system is and making sure that your naming conventions match up with the order that you want things in there. And so you do need to make sure you design that ordering system so that just in case you have to put something in the middle. So let's say you design and you say, I want to do 1, 2, 3, and now I need a 2.5. Well, when you list it, that's kind of hard. So do you do 0, 1, 0, 2, 0, 3, 0, 4, or 10, 20, 30? 100, 200, 300. So there's some things to consider in order to ensure, back to the original question, that it happens in that order. So it does it, if you were to go to your command line and do a listing of your files, that is the order Liquibase will package or process them.
That's good, Mike. One thing that I've seen people do over, and it's kind of a common problem, is people will start numbering the files 1 underscore something, 2 underscore 3 underscore, and when you get to 10, sometimes since it's a text string, 10 comes after 1 and before 2, and so a common best practice is to use leading zeros when you're numbering things like that. To as many decimal places, to as many units as is relevant. Like if you think that you're going to have, in this case, package bodies, no more than 100 package bodies, then you can start with 00, or less than 1,000. You can start with 001, 002, 003, and that takes you up to 999, and then you're totally safe for the first 1,000. So you just kind of have to give a little thought about what you think where you think you're going to end up, and then kind of pick your naming convention to match.
Hey, I'll jump in with one other tidbit just to know, because this actually came up in our internal Slack today, trying to solve a problem for a user. According to one of our lead engineers, Java sorts differently than Windows Explorer. So a person posed a question because they had a view in Windows, and they had named them in a certain way, and then they ran, and it did not execute in that order. There's no particular answer for that, unfortunately, but that is a thing to be aware of.
Yeah, it's not operating system order that we're sorting it in. We're sorting them in, alphanumeric order of the file names, which, the operating systems might do it differently. They're maybe tending to be the same, maybe not, I don't know, but it's going to be sort of consistent and managed by us anyway, the sorting, not the OS. There's also a resource comparator attribute you can put on include all, and then you can specify your own custom logic. So if you want to do something completely different, you can certainly do that and control your thing in there with some Java coding. Again, if you'd like to kind of extend that functionality, they have that as well too, if they're looking for something really odd. Or not odd, but different than what we do.
To them, yes.
All right, here's the big one.
Okay, well, I am going to not read this entire thing out, but the gist of it is, let me see if I can consolidate this. They have a master changelog, and they want to run it in parallel on a bunch of databases. This is typically something you'll see when you have a bunch of production databases out. Maybe it's a web application and you have 50, either 50 customers would have different databases, or you just have a huge volume of databases you need to get updated because you just manage the load. And the question is, instead of running them, I believe the question is, instead of running them one by one with Liquibase, is there a way to run it in parallel? It's also a Spring Boot application.
Yeah, I was reading through it just to be sure here.
Each customer has a dedicated Azure SQL database and multiple environments of 3 databases per customer. We're currently using Liquibase to apply all our SQL changes, and it's working great, but we're at the point where we're being hit with deployment scalability issues. So it is a situation of different databases per customer, and as their number of customers grows, they start having scaling problems because they're doing a lot more deployments. And so if they're running things one by one in serial, that is slow, and if they could run them in parallel, it's faster.
Yeah, but they also say that they're able to connect to all the databases and creates Liquibase tables, but it soon releases the lock and is not executing the changelog file. So it sort of acts like it's going through all of them, but it's maybe not actually kind of running the update on all of them, possibly.
Is there anything theoretically?
Yes.
Theoretically,
so
I guess is the first question.
Yeah, so I can talk about it in the sort of theoretical setup here. If you're running an application, you're using Spring Boot. With Spring Boot, Liquibase is running automatically on application startup. So it's automatically going to do an update as your system comes online. If you have as you're getting into sort of Spring and Spring Boot, you're getting into a lot of the sort of extensibility and configurability built into Spring Boot there as well too. And so it sounds like they're kind of trying to, be able to kind of go through a list of connections and apply the Liquibase update to each of those, and do those kind of in parallel. It's, so one thing that you want to make sure is that Liquibase is getting configured to use a separate database changelog table and a separate database changelog lock table for each of those different databases. They're each independent and independently running on Liquibase in there. So you'd want to make sure that the connection Liquibase is using is sort of unique for each of them, depending on what it means by applying it to each database. I don't know if they have a like a single connection. And so it ends up using the same database changelog table for each one. Perhaps they need to set, each time through the loop, you need to make sure you're setting your Liquibase, the Liquibase schema and the Liquibase catalog name to be, kind of correct for each of the different databases. So it's not somehow sharing the same changelog table for each one, from their comment of it's releasing the lock, but not actually doing anything. And that makes it sound like in the end, the changelog table that they're using is getting reused across each of the different runs. And so the trick is, why is it that it's using that same database changelog table? But yeah, as long as you're going through and you're pointing each connection to a separate database, and each has the separate lock table and the separate history table, they should all be able to run in parallel with each other. If you're running into issues around that, can definitely reach out to us in there. We're looking to improve some of the multi-threading configuration stuff, and we have some testable things you can try. I don't know if that's what they'd be hitting, or if it's more from their coding side.
So this also goes back to the first question we had, or one of the first questions we had in there, about separating the changelog from the database itself. And so if you're using a shared database for all of your changelog, your tracking table information, and now you're starting to expand like this is something else to consider. Is this going to happen in your environment here? So.
Yep. So I think the general answer is, if you're following standard Liquibase practice, it should work just fine. You should be able to deploy multiple deploy Liquibase changes or your database changes out to multiple databases at the same time. It should be fine. In fact, it seems like they were working at one point and things aren't working now. So it may be that there's something complicated in your setup, and it's probably worth digging a little bit deeper. Luckily, this person's on the forum, so we can reach out and find a little bit more information. So we can definitely do that. But it sounds like in general, it should work. And since it's not, we have community. We have our community. We can jump in there and we can talk and we can figure it out. So we'll definitely go follow up on that one and see where that goes.
Absolutely. I think that brings us to the end of the questions that we had in our list. Does anybody have any other questions that they'd like to ask that maybe some of that information brought up for you? Guess not. All right, so we're going to go over our product updates and community updates real quick. So version 4.13 was released, I think, was it on Monday this week or last week? I can't remember.
I think it was Monday this week.
Monday this week, yes. So that has some new updates. We only had 2 new community contributors this time, but we really appreciate when our community helps out on GitHub and contributes to the open source project. So what's new in 4.13? The most notable change is probably the run with command update. The search path global configuration one, and the duplicate file mode setting. You can check out all of these updates in the release notes on the documentation site or on the GitHub in the changelog. These links will all be in the video description on YouTube too. And then our community updates. These are our top 5 forum supporters for this month. Excuse me. We really appreciate when people help out on the forum with answering questions and even with bringing their questions to us. That's also something that we really like to interact with the community. So bring them. We are also hiring, and here's some of the positions that are open. So if you or someone you know is looking for work, we need marketing and DevOps and we still need a community Java developer. Yeah.
We do. We would love to have, if you're a Java developer and you want to come work in community and help other community members get their changes through and help us build a better framework and improve it and teach others, and you can join us and work alongside Nathan and Karen, Tabby, myself, and we would love to have you. So feel free to jump in there and submit your resume, and we'll chat.
Absolutely. And don't forget to sign up for Liquibase Legends, because your attendance here today will count towards some points towards earning your different badges. And I have to say, I'm excited because I made legend this past week. So yay.
Congratulations, Tabby.
Thank you. So again, we appreciate the input and the participation of the community. We have folks that help out on Stack Overflow and on GitHub and our forums and in Discord. And it's fantastic. I'm really excited about the growth that the community is experiencing. And this is the end. We are going to do a roundtable for next month, but we have not chosen a topic yet. But that will be on the 11th. Same thing, second Thursday of the month at 11 a.m. Central Standard Time in the US. And that is the end of the show. Whoops, how do I stop share? There we go. Wrong button. So thanks everybody for coming. Does anybody have any other questions before we go?
I do.
Okay.
I'm just curious, and people feel free to answer this or not, community members. Coming to this meeting today, like sort of where you are and what you're working on, what were you hoping to learn more about?
It's Ian here.
Ian.
I'm looking forward to using Liquibase on projects in the future. And I'm seeing this as a chance to familiarize myself with the team and the community, ready for when those projects start.
Great.
So it rubs off on me over the weeks.
Thanks for answering, Ian. That's great.
I see Archer just unmuted himself. Did you have a response for Karen? No, but nice music in the background. All right. Muni, could you share a quick overview of what you're expecting to get out of this call? Everybody's so quiet today. It must be too hot out for people to. Everybody's keeping their energy. All right. Well, thank you. Oh, there you are.
Hi.
Yes.
Yeah. Hi, Tim. Yeah, how are you?
Doing well. How are you doing?
Yeah, I'm doing well. Actually, I'm a new beginner for Liquibase. We started using Liquibase in our project. So I learned a lot of new things regarding about Liquibase while starting to use the tool. It's a pretty good tool to update the databases and automate the databases. Yeah, I mean, from my perception, I have only one request. It's actually for new beginners or who are very, exaggerate to learn the Liquibase. They can able to learn from the installation of Liquibase and up to the for their requirement, they can use the tool. But apart from this, I need to know one thing. How can we use the Liquibase tool to automate the database using pipelines like Azure DevOps like that?
All right. Who would like to handle that question? How do you, what's the best practices for using Liquibase in an Azure DevOps?
Yeah, exactly. For automating the databases, like a SQL database or whatever the database.
And Mike has a great answer to that one, more than me. That's what he
I was
does.
gonna say, I don't want to put Mike on the spot. But...
Volunteer.
No,
I do. Go, Mike.
So there's a couple different ways to kind of do that from Azure DevOps. It depends on the types of agents that you have, whether those are the out of the box agent to be able to run that in the pipeline. If it's the out of the box one, you download it at runtime or at build time in your pipeline. You download Liquibase and then you run Liquibase update. That's the simplest piece. It's just a shell command that you would execute to do that. We have several several examples in our toolbox. There is a GitHub repo that's a toolbox that you can probably take a sample of. The second thing is if you're using your own runners, right? You have your own agents that are connecting to your databases because they're probably on premises potentially or in your own network. You can install Liquibase on that system. And then again, it's the same command that you're using, Liquibase update. There are some other commands that you can use to be able to validate, to be able to check whether things are going well. And again, some of those are in that template file that you can kind of use to start to use with your pipelines.
Yeah.
So Mike, is that the Liquibase toolbox repo?
Correct.
All right, I'll put that link in the chat. We'll have that.
Yeah.
I want to check that out.
Yeah, definitely. Sure. Yeah. Thanks a lot.
Yep. And Muni, if you have questions as you're going through things, feel free and make sure to go to forum.liquibase.com and ask your question there, and we can continue the dialogue.
Yeah, sure. Yeah. Thanks a lot.
You're very welcome.
Yeah. Cool. Have a great day.
You too.
Thanks.
All right. Artur, last chance. Jimmy, last chance. If you had any other questions, be happy to answer them.
Or if you'd like to share what you hope to see today in our meetup.
All right. Everybody is being quiet.
That's right. Must be lunchtime,
It's
or at least it is here. So.
All right, Tabby. Well, thank you very much for today.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, everybody, for coming. We appreciate you. Bye.
Yeah. Bye. Thanks a lot, team.